I saw Denali for the first time today. This takes your breath away. The thing is massive. Never seen anything so big. Heart kind of just stops. You kind of get this weird turning in your gut. And you're like, wow, I'm gonna be right up there. I can't even imagine what the people who are trying to go to the summit feel like. Definitely an amazing day of traveling to see something so magnificent for the first time. What an honor.
Denali, the tallest mountain in North America, north of Anchorage in Alaska, known as the Tall One or the Great One. Denali stands at 20,310 feet. Pretty astonishing. On June 7th, 1913, it was first ascended by Walter Harper, Harry Karstens, Hudson Stuck, and Robert Tatum. For mountaineers in the United States and across the globe, ascending a peak like Denali is a crowned achievement. It is one of the 7 summits, that being the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents. When I first saw Denali, it was on a bus ride from Anchorage to Talkeetna. Looking out the window, I kid you not, I saw something that I didn't think was possible to be on this planet. It was a clear day, blue skies, not even a cloud in the sky, and I saw something huge way off in the distance, beyond the mountains that were already big around me, just way off. And I was like, that's the biggest thing I've ever seen. And then next to it was something even bigger. I realized I was staring at Mount Foraker. And right next to Foraker was Denali. And it stood taller than Foraker. And I was like, wow. It just jetted right up, looked like it was touching space. A pure block of ice, white, crystal white. It took my breath away. When I got to Talkeetna, and I stood on the side of the Susitna River, and I looked at Denali, standing on the riverbank, and I saw the entire Alaska range for the first time. There's not enough words created as humans to explain what something so magnificent is. We have a gift of being on this planet. And the planet has so many mysteries. And one of the greatest mysteries is mountains of that stature. There is an entire ecosystem up there of glaciers and steep terrain, and they bring on the most violent storms. And you think that it's not possible for a human being to get to the top. When we flew out from Talkeetna Air Taxi to Denali Basecamp, there was almost 500 people on the mountain, all either trying to learn, trying to climb nearby summits, or trying to ascend Denali itself. People can do it. Mountaineers, thousands have. And because the human spirit is amazing, there have also been a handful of type 1 diabetics to ascend Denali. After being diagnosed in 2019, and doing my research on mountains, I learned about type 1 diabetics summiting Denali. Instantly, it was on my list. I wanted to climb the ladder. Of course, that first meant Mount Elbert, and then Mount Whitney, and then Mount Rainier to learn more mountaineering skills and how to navigate and traverse through glaciated territory. On my journey to get to some of the tallest mountains on the planet, after Mount Rainier, I knew my next step would be Alaska. I knew I couldn't just outright climb Denali yet. There was still much I had to learn, and there still is much I have to learn. But I found a way to prepare the best I can, step by step. Alaska Mountaineering School is located in Talkeetna, Alaska, a nice small town and considered the launch pad for going to Denali. They were offering a Denali Prep Course. 1 week at Denali Basecamp and on the glacier, which is called the Kahiltna Glacier. Kahiltna meaning from the source. You should see the massive rivers that the Kahiltna Glacier carves out, leading from the Alaska Range Mountains all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Alaska Mountaineering School is the best of the best. They are a guide service with some of the most experienced mountaineers on the planet, and they don't only provide the service of guidance on Denali to get to the summit, but they also offer courses to learn about crevasse rescue, glacier travel, everything you need to know to get ready for an attempt like Denali. This course to me was crucial, especially having type 1 diabetes. I wanted all of my ducks in a row for when in the future I eventually go back there to attempt the summit. Today we are going through the 1 week that I lived on the Kahiltna Glacier in May 2024. My name is Joseph Anthony Marcello. I am one of roughly 1.3 million people in the US and 8.4 million worldwide diagnosed with the autoimmune disease type 1 diabetes. I am proud to call myself a weightlifter, a runner, a mountaineer, an athlete. As a T1D, I know I'm not the only one. We will discuss with others what it takes to be a T1D athlete and what it means to be tough. This is T1 Determined. Before we begin the topic of today's episode, I would like to make some really cool announcements. Thank you to your support and really the community that we are building and growing with T1 Determined. I am excited to say that we have a huge project in the pipeline. T1 Determined is all about podcast, blog posts, and documentaries. I'm excited to say that our first large-scale documentary will be a feature film titled Low Blood Sugar at High Altitude. Very fitting, right? And it will cover what will be an expedition of myself climbing Denali as a type 1 diabetic. We are working with the best of the best in guide services and the best of the best in filmmaking to bring the highest of quality to this documentary. This will be my directorial debut as a filmmaker for a feature film. And there is not a topic that I am more dedicated to than trying to show the world what type 1 diabetics can do. It is a movie that's going to delve into a lot of science. And I believe my whole mission with this is to showcase how you can still live an active, healthy lifestyle with type 1 diabetes. If anything, you can live more of an active, healthy lifestyle just being so in tune with your body. And I want to bring that to a cinematic experience. If you focus on your body and all of the elements that bring you the best, greatest outcome in health, hydration, nutrition, blood sugar, everything, it will only maximize your performance. This film is not solely about a Denali climb. We are bringing in a community of type 1 diabetics to accomplish it, multiple interviews. So I'm really excited to begin this process. It is a long process. It'll probably take more than a year to complete this film, and that includes an actual climb for the film. So we are underway, and I'm very grateful for our team. We have an amazing team that is bringing this to you, and I can't wait for you to see it. I'd also like to say how November is National Diabetes Month. Bringing awareness to what type 1 diabetes is and showcasing how it is an obstacle for people, but that obstacle can be used as motivation to accomplish great feats, is the mission of T1 Determined. And I am very excited how this community has grown within just a couple months of launching this year. And 2025 is going to be a bigger year. So just spreading the awareness. If you know somebody in your life with type 1 diabetes, just patting them on the back, letting them know that they're doing a good job every day, even when they think that they're not. Every day is a struggle with this disease. And it's really just to manage it is an accomplishment within itself. So I am proud to release this episode during National Diabetes Month. I say all of this data, I read out my numbers, I tell you my A1C. Normally, I am against asking people's A1C. That is up to you, the individual. I am doing this just to present data. I am not saying any one way or the other is a better way to live with type 1 diabetes. I'm explaining how I personally live, and I am just presenting the data. I am not even presenting an analysis of the data. I don't think I am in a position to do that. So I am just giving information, and I think it's cool. Hopefully you think it's cool as well. All right, let's dive in. So I went to Alaska in May of 2024. Leading up, I was training for this trip starting in November of 2023. Training for this trip included of hikes in my local hills, getting elevation of around 2,000 feet of elevation gain once a week with weights. And then it also required running 20 to 25 miles a week. On top of that, I tried to go to the gym 4 to 5 times a week to do light weight training. I believe weight training is crucial on top of the cardio training. And I also believe that hiking with weight really did prepare me for 1 week of glacier travel. So what did that do to my body? I have been used for the past several years for training for long periods of time. But starting in November and going all the way to April, that is a extension of time that was probably the largest training period in my life. What I found was that the more I trained, the harder the weeks, the less insulin I had to use. I was on a very carb-heavy diet. I was doing long duration cardio exercises probably 4 times a week. Which up to 48 hours after I would see an effect in my glucose. So I was eating probably about 200 carbs per day. And the insulin I was using, my ratio for my Humalog, my short acting, was 1 unit per 12 carbs. And my long acting Lantus was down to 16 units once a night. That since the trip to Alaska has changed because my training has changed, but looking back at the amount of training that I was doing, it was a lot. And leading up to the expedition, my A1C was at 5.6. Unfortunately, to be blunt and honest, that meant I did experience a lot of lows. One thing that I learned through the training process was how to navigate the lows. And I think towards the end of the training process for Alaska, I was able to stop the dips. Every time I went low, it started going gradually low, and I would set my CGM alarm to go off a little quicker. I am usually comfortable with getting into the low 70s for my blood glucose, but I would start my alarm at 75 to let me know, and that would prevent me from going lower. I found that sometimes when I had my alarm set at 70, I was already going so low that by the time I was at 70, a couple minutes later, I was down to 60 and below, which then can get pretty dangerous. By the end of the training process, just by being aware of what point during the week my blood sugar and what point during the day my blood sugar would go low, whether it is during a run, during exercise, or post-meal because I gave too much insulin, I was able to prevent my blood glucose from going low right away. One major thing that helped is the watch that I wear has a timer. I know that my insulin, my short-acting insulin, has a life cycle about 3 hours and 30 minutes, which means it has a half-life of about 1 hour and 45 minutes. So what I do is it starts around 15 minutes after injection. What I'll do is 15 minutes before I eat a carb. That doesn't mean a dinner. I usually start my dinners. We're going to use dinner as an example for here because it's the easiest to explain. For dinner, I usually eat my fibers, so my vegetables. We'll use broccoli as an example. Then I eat protein. We'll use salmon as an example, and then I'll eat the carb. We'll use farro as an example, which is an ancient grain. So for a night at dinner, I will probably eat 64 grams of carbs from the farro, and I would inject my insulin count about 15 minutes before I eat. And then about 7.5 minutes to go, that's when I'll start my meal. So I can eat the broccoli and the salmon before I eat the grain. And then by the time I eat the grain, my 15-minute timer goes off on my watch. And then I set a timer for 1 hour and 30 minutes. At the end of that 1 hour and 30 minutes, I know that the half-life of my fast-acting insulin is up. And then I set another timer for 1 hour and 45 minutes. At the end of that 1 hour and 45 minutes, I know that I am off-board fast-acting insulin. So just knowing this, being in tune with the watch, going to Alaska knowing this, it really helped knowing when I was on board, off board. I know that 45 minutes after my insulin injection, that is the peak of the insulin use. So if I saw a low, I know that it would most likely happen within those first 45 minutes. Likewise, if there was a high within the 45 minutes, I know that high could possibly start coming down because the insulin would start working thereafter. On top of the weekly training, running, the gym, hiking nearby, every 21 days, so every 3 weeks, I would try to do an overnight expedition in the beautiful White Mountains of New Hampshire. During my training period, it was wintertime, so there was plenty of opportunities. Taylor Adams and I did the presidentials in New Hampshire over the course of 3 days, where we stayed in a tent overnight. That was great experience for Alaska. Very similar. New Hampshire gets just as cold in the winter as Alaska did in the summer, and it was awesome to just learn how to live in snow. I have a lot of experience of hiking, climbing overnights, but just doing it in the presidentials where you're above tree line, where the terrain very much mimics what the Alaskan terrain is. Just digging out camp, stomping the snow, getting your tent ready, and then protecting yourself from the wind, cooking in high wind area, an exposed area. Yeah, it was great training. A friend and I also did Mountain Zealand, and we stayed at the Zealand Hut, which was a wonderful time. So just doing these training expeditions, I call them expeditions because it's fun. Doing them every 21 days, it was great because you got the feel of what it's like to live in constant winter, and Alaska was constant winter with variations that we'll get into of how hot it got during the day. So finally, getting to Alaska. Before this trip, I have never been to Alaska. And at the beginning of this episode, I talked about what it was like to see something as awesome as Denali. Right before my trip to Alaska, I had a work trip to Nevada. That was about a week. So already landing in Alaska a couple days before the expedition was set to begin, I was already about 10 days off my normal routine. I didn't eat like I normally do during my training period. And one of the faults I found right away was that I didn't prepare enough to have a trained meal every single day. So going into the expedition, I was already starving. I'm not used to eating on the road, eating at sub shops, coffee shops, and restaurants night after night after night. I like my home-cooked meals. So the first thing I learned was that when I returned to Alaska, I need to have a much greater plan on having those home-cooked meals being readily available. I was starving before we even left to an expedition that I would only grow an immense amount of hunger due to my exertion, but that's okay. I eat a lot, I managed. I eat a lot of food that I don't have to eat, so I was okay. Lesson learned for preparation for next time. When I first got to Kahiltna, it was the day before we were set to leave. I got to meet the awesome team, the instructors, Greg and David. They felt like a father figure and a brother figure. They managed our group very well, and it was awesome to meet them on the first day. The day that we were set to leave for the expedition, another big lesson I learned in Alaska is hurry up and wait, much like the film industry. It was raining. Without being able to see the mountain, pilots can't land on Denali Basecamp. I also didn't want to fly in the clouds where you can't see. I was very nervous about jumping in a bush plane. This was the first time that I was in a small plane like that and landing somewhere so remote, such as a glacier, where you are miles and miles away from the nearest civilization. So I am A-okay with the fact that we wouldn't leave until we had clear visibility. It was the third day that we finally got clear visibility to go to Denali. So we waited in town for 1 to 2 days. I was sleeping in a tent. I was trying to get myself used to the fact of staying on glacier in a tent for such a long period of time, getting used to the air pad and whatnot. So I was already getting lack of sleep, pretty uncomfortable, but getting used to it, which I thought was a benefit. Day 3 was the day that we landed at Denali Basecamp. I was terrified getting in that airplane, but it was one of the most smooth rides that I was ever on. Looking out the window, I've never seen so much wilderness where you don't see a building, you don't see roads. I mean, I've seen remote places, I've been to remote places, but this was just on a whole new scale. So much green, the rivers again were massive, the forests were magnificent, and then the mountains just overpowered everything. As soon as you were close to a cliff, looking out the window, I just couldn't believe that I was this close, a plane flying this close right next to a cliff. And you're just looking out and the cliff is right there and you're right here and you're just hoping to God that you don't go a little closer to the cliff. But the pilots at Kahiltna Air Taxi are the absolute utmost professionals. They know how to navigate this kind of terrain. And we landed very smoothly at Denali Basecamp, more smooth than I thought the entire flight would be. So day 3 was our first day at Denali Basecamp. Right away, we unloaded all of our gear on the plane, off the plane, and we walked up a hill to find a best spot for a camp, and the work started instantly. We needed a place to sleep, we needed a place to cook, we needed a place to go to the bathroom, so we just underway right away, getting all of that, stomping on the snow. We did a lot of snow stomping just to prepare the camp. We set up the tent, and then we did digging to set up what is called mid-tents. Mid-tents are our cooking tent. Essentially, we were able to just dig out a whole kitchen. There was so much snow there that you dig 4 or 5 feet deep, and you put out walls, and you create a counter with the snow. Our first kitchen that we built, didn't look the greatest. We didn't do the best job, but that was our first time building a kitchen like that. So by the end of the trip, we were professionals with building a kitchen. We had luxury seats and everything, and counter space and little shelving. And the first one wasn't so pretty, but nonetheless, the learning and the expedition had begun. Day 4, we did a training hike. Now, when you're at base camp, you set up wands at the edge of where your camp is, because if you go beyond those wands, you go into what we call the danger zone, crevasse territory. The last thing you want is to fall into a crevasse. Base camps, a Denali base camp is typically probed out. There's enough people there that you know the area that is safe. When you go beyond Denali base camp, you really have to probe out your camp to make sure that you are safe from crevasses. So day 4 was our preparation hike to move beyond base camp. We weren't going to move beyond base camp quite yet, but we were getting ready for it. So this would involve glacier travel, traveling beyond those wands, which is the edge of safety, and making sure that we were safe, roped up on a rope with our entire team to go beyond those wands for crevasse travel. We navigated through open crevasses. We crossed over probably hundreds of crevasses that we didn't know that we were stepping over. So roping up on a team means that you have the responsibility of not only yourself but your teammate. So you got to watch your step. You gotta make sure that your rope is tight. If God forbid anybody falls through a crevasse, the idea is that the rope can catch that person and you can make a quick and safe rescue and move on with your day and continue on. If one of those things is off, if you're not focused, if you're not paying attention, if your rope is loose, it could be a very bad day if you or your teammate falls into a crevasse. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you're not just only protecting your life, but you're protecting the lives of your teammates. So you really have to build a trust and a sense of camaraderie with your team while you're on the mountain. First thing that I learned about my blood sugar while on a hike is that I shouldn't have ate so much sugar in preparation. Usually, before I exert myself and go on a hike, I eat a lot of sugar because my blood sugar goes up. And then my hike, my exertion, my cardio, my muscles will start craving that sugar and my blood glucose will start to go down. But what I learned from day one is that when you're traveled on a rope and you have an objective as big as Denali, you take your time, moving very slow, which meant my heart rate wasn't going as fast, which meant I did not need as much sugar as I did. I think the first day I learned it the most, but it was definitely throughout the trip and looking back that I will be better prepared for next time, is that it's a slow push. I call it the long haul slow burn. And you navigate through the terrain, but you're not in a rush. And by the time, so I tried to eat sugar before I roped up. That was also not a good thing. Because then by the time I was done roped up and my whole team was roped up, it was about 30 minutes after I had that sugar, which means it hit. And during my first hike, my blood sugar was relatively high. But it was a great learning lesson. I got it back down. Once we got back down to the camp, I was able to give some insulin. No big deal. I knew that during this entire expedition, my blood sugar would be running on the higher end. It got into the 300s to 350s on that hike, which I did not want that kind of. I was hoping to stay between 180 and 250. Normally, I stay between, again, 70 and 150. But being on a trip and exerting yourself, I was okay with being in a higher level. I did not like the fact that I was at an even higher level. But, I learned my lesson on day one, and I used that information to even just adapt while on that trip. Moving slow. It's okay to have a glucose and sugar and your energy source while on the move. I didn't have to have it so early before I actually started exerting myself. Day 5, the first day that we left Denali Basecamp to walk on the Kahiltna Glacier. So this was, so far, the longest haul that we have done up until this point. We walked down a section called Heartbreak Hill. It is called Heartbreak Hill because on the way back, you have to go up it, not down it. Very reminiscent of Boston's Heartbreak Hill, which I have known going into it. So when I heard the name, I was like, oh boy, this is fun going down. I can't imagine it's going to be much fun going up. But day number 5, we didn't have to worry about that. After Denali Basecamp, so Denali has several camps. There's the base camp, then there is Ski Hill Camp, then there is 11 Camp, which sits at 11,000 feet. Then there is 14 Camp, which sits at 14,000 feet. Then there is 17 Camp, which sits at 17,000 feet. And then there's the summit. We were projected to do the lower half of the mountain, which means a range of Denali Basecamp to Ski Hill Camp. Ski Hill Camp sits at the bottom of what is called Ski Hill. So it's before Camp 11, and it is after Denali Basecamp. Knowing that our objective was Ski Hill and we had a slow start, so we were moving in the heat of the day. Our objective as a group was to create a place that we called Half Camp, halfway to Ski Hill. So we made it halfway to Ski Hill before we created a camp. Moving in the hot sun. Another lesson that I learned, a little bit on the day before, but mainly on this day, is that it gets hot on a glacier. On a previous episode, Taylor informed me of this information, and man, was he right. I did not bring a sun hoodie. I learned that right away was a mistake. So next time I need a sun hoodie. I was able to use a piece of clothing that was able to block the back of my head. So thank God I didn't get crisped up by the sun. So navigating through an environment that is really hot, the sun hits the snow, you're up higher in the atmosphere, so the atmosphere is actually thinner, and that sun reflects off the snow, and it creates like a little, like an oven. But the second the sun gets blocked by a cloud or right behind a piece of rock, it's the air temperature is still very cold, close to freezing, if not below. So you really have to navigate being really hot 1 second and then maybe a split second later being very cold. What does that mean for insulin? I had insulin on my body, on a vest, to protect against the cold. But when it got really hot, I didn't want my insulin to overheat. I didn't want it to freeze, but I didn't want it to overheat. I wanted it to still be effective. So during the middle of the day, I would actually take my vest off and put it in my backpack, knowing that the sun was hitting my backpack to keep it relatively warm, and not as hot as my body, because man, I was sweating. I was wearing heavy layers just to protect my skin from the sun. So I was okay with personally sweating, but I was not okay with my insulin overheating. So throughout the hike and throughout the day of building camp afterwards, I managed taking insulin off my body, putting it in my bag, and then putting it in my bag, putting it in my tent when we had the tent set up, because the tents got really hot as well. But being very conscious of if there was a cloud, where the sun was at during the day, how I felt temperature wise, if it was getting cooler, I would grab that. I always knew where my insulin was, and I always tried to just be conscious of what the temperature of the insulin was so I could put it back on my body instantly. It was not never on my mind. It was always on my mind. Very mentally taxing when you're digging camp and you're digging those kitchens I was talking about. And then instantly I'm like, where's my insulin? Go check it, make sure it's okay. Go back out, start digging. 5 minutes later, where's my insulin? You just checked it, it's okay. Another 5 minutes later, go check it. It adds an extra task, but I think it's well worth it to know exactly what the temperature of your insulin is, making sure it's not freezing, making sure it's not overheating, just being very conscious of it. Day number 6 was one of my most favorite days. It was a rest day. It's very important on these expeditions. Once we built what we called half camp, it was a very taxing day. Just being out in the heat of the sun. Instructors did not like the fact that we were moving in the middle of the day during the hottest part of the day. We really didn't have another option with how our group was moving along. So they decided that day 6 would be our first rest day. I loved it. We learned all about probing, proper probing, making sure that our camp is safe. It was great in the field learning because we actually came across the day before several crevasses that we almost had a camp safe and ready to go, and then we'd find a crevasse by probing. And then it took us a little while to get a nice, safe, tight area. So day 6, the rest day, we really learned about how to focus on making sure the area is safe. Learned a lot of information about what it's like to be up on the higher part of the mountain, off of the glacier, so you're more in the wind-exposed territory, colder areas of the mountain, which present a whole different type of obstacle. So we learned a lot of information from our instructors then. Greg and Dave just have an immense amount of knowledge that I am grateful to have learned from them. They can share their experiences of what the top part of the mountain was while we were on the bottom part, learning how to move through that. I also love rest days because those were podcast listening days, book reading days, going out and just staring at the scenery. You're in an arena of the largest mountains in North America. I mean, there was not a bad view in the place. We're blessed to have great weather the entire time, so you could really see everything. You could see the summit of Denali. It was just staring you down. And then the next day, day 7, we were ready to wake up early, cook breakfast early, cook our meals, and just pack up and go to Ski Hill, which would be our final camp. We moved early, so we got to Ski Hill camp pretty early. We were able to probe out, find a safe space, dig our little kitchen, set up our tents. So day 7 was an on-the-move day. Now, this is at the point in the expedition where you're here for a while. You're here day after day. You're kind of doing the what I call the long haul slow burn. You had a rest day, but this is the point where your nutrition starts catching up with you. I did my best to eat an immense amount of carbs, but you only have a certain amount of food that you can bring with you. You're carrying sleds, so that food is on the sled. But I mean, it's not like you can get an air package of food dropped off. I mean, I'm sure you can find food from other groups of people and the park services, but you really got to be conscious of what you're eating. I brought a lot of farro with me, and every night I was having farro. Farro is my choice because it is easy to carry and it's a whole grain. I found that at least one meal of having whole grains was really beneficial. I think my blood sugars were doing a lot of bouncing. So having snacks that were high in carbs but also low in carbs. I brought some trail mix with a lot of nuts and then like the cheese puffs in it. I brought some beef jerky that was low in carbs. So really trying to balance out having complex carbs with you so you could eat that kind of like I do at home. I eat it at night. I was eating farro, I mean, for lunch and for dinner on this trip. I was trying to get as much carbs in me as possible. But again, I learned that my blood sugar was staying a little higher than I thought it would. I thought I'd be exerting myself, but the lower part of the mountain, you move slower. You're not hiking for long periods of time. The real taxing part is the muscular work of digging out camp. I also wanted to make sure that I had that fast-acting sugar on me. Because my blood sugar was higher, towards the higher end at some points, I would get a little frustrated with myself, and then I'd give correction factors, and then it would dip right away. Unlike at home, I found that whenever I gave correction factors, it hit almost instantly, and that showed me that I was having a lot of sugar in my blood, but I wasn't having a lot of complex carbs. So my body, my muscles were still lacking the carbs. So as soon as the insulin hit, it would just drop my blood glucose. So I made sure also to have a lot of fast-acting sugar, Cliff bars, energy gels. Another big important part about the nutrition was I brought omega-3 fish oil pills and multivitamins with me every day. I had multiple hydration drinks with me every day. So staying constantly hydrated with electrolytes and still having my source of vitamins and omega-3s. I think like at the end of the day, no matter how much nutrients I was lacking, at least I had the multivitamin. At least I had a little bit of something. At least I had a Nuun hydration. At least I had an element pack. I think that is crucial, that my body was very grateful for that fact, is even if my blood glucose was a little higher that day, at least I was still healthy in other ways, because I knew I was going to be a little bit of a deficit. I knew I'm not going to have a huge 5-course meal on this mountain. So still doing the best that I can to stay hydrated. I didn't wake up feeling groggy. Even if I had a bad day of my blood sugar, I didn't at one point ever feel like my blood sugar was getting in the way from me moving. And I think that was a huge contribution to staying hydrated, making sure that the food I had was still nutritious, all parts of the food group, still having a well-balanced diet. So day 8 of our expedition was going to be a huge hike day. We were trying to get to the highest point that we can because we knew that the day next we were starting to head back. This was towards the end of our trip. One of the more fun days. We started hiking. Our goal was to try to get to as close as 11 camp as possible, just to say we got there, huge learning expedition. We didn't have a major objective to get to. So there was a lot of no pressure. There was not a lot of pressure. That being said, we really wanted to get as high as possible. It was the one day that was not cooperating with the weather. We started going up Ski Hill and socked in by the clouds. We made it going up a little further to finally the instructor Greg said it's not worth risking. We don't have an objective to get to. We see a couple of the people turning around, the wind's picking up, it's getting really cold. We decided to turn around. again, when we were socked in with the clouds, it did get really cold. So I was very conscious of where my insulin was. It was really cool for at least a little bit, to experience what the top part of the mountain might be like. And just, again, another huge thing I learned with climbing Denali for a future trip of climbing Denali is just patience. Patience is king. You just got to wait it out. If the weather's not good, just don't go. Stay in the tent, turn around, don't risk it. Being patient and not taking a risk are huge factors that I learned from this trip. We turned around, great day of learning about crevasse rescue. We learned how to build 3-to-1 anchors, which I already had a little bit of prior knowledge coming into this course about how to build 3-to-1 anchors. Then we learned how to build 5-to-1, 7-to-1. The force, a 3-to-1, you are pulling, what you're pulling on the load for an anchor and for crevasse rescue is 3-to-1. So you're pulling once, but you're getting 3 times the load towards you. So crevasse rescue is somebody falls into a crevasse and they're hanging there by the rope. You have to build an anchor, obviously, for your team members that aren't in the crevasse, but then you have to build a rescue anchor to be able to pull that person out of the rope. So the higher the ratio, the stronger the pull is. So the less effort you have to do. That being said, we were having a blast. We learned a whole lot. We didn't drop into a crevasse, but we jumped on sleds to try to pretend like somebody was in one and we were pulling them up. And we talked this was a day that after our hike we were kind of bummed out that we didn't get as high as we wanted to. The camp was right below the clouds, so it's still some visibility. We learned a lot by talking, by learning about each other's lives. The instructors were really going through their experiences on the mountains because both of them have summited multiple times. This was a day that no money can buy. The experience that you get from a day like this is burned in my memory, and it was to me, it was the pinnacle of this trip. It's just a blast, just being there, enjoying where you're at. The arena is just so magnificent. You're talking and you're hearing rock fall, and you're looking over there, and there's a huge avalanche that is so far away from you that you know you're out of danger. And the avalanche is here because you're out of avalanche territory, but you can see the avalanche territory, and you can see like huge clouds of snow billowing everywhere. So just sitting back and looking at where you're at on the planet, really cool, really cool. I also found that during the hike up to a little bit of backtracking here, but during the hike, that was the most exertion that I was doing for the entire trip because it was the steepest part. And I found that due to the fast pace, heart rate was higher, it was steeper, it was more difficult. My blood sugar actually did a lot better. My glucose was more to what it was during my training period, just because I was used to just fast-paced training. I think that when I train for Denali, I'm going to try to get my body used to slow-paced training as well. Having the combination of both, I think, will be beneficial. So day 9 was a long haul, slow burn, all the way back to Denali Basecamp. We packed up early, gone from Ski Hill, traveled back across what was half camp, and up Heartbreak Hill again. To be honest, I didn't do a whole Denali expedition, so I can imagine what it's like after trying to go to the top and then coming back. After just going to Ski Hill and coming back, Heartbreak Hill was not that bad. I did find that day I was preparing for a similar style hike like I was up Ski Hill, where it was more exertion, but it was, again, I learned, very much slower. We were going more downhill. We didn't go uphill until the heartbreak part. That day was the 10th day of my CGM, my sensor. And it gave out halfway through the hike. And I am very, very proud to say that I did that entire half of a hike going manually. Manually pricking my finger for my blood glucose through my glucometer. Every 10 to 15 minutes, I would just quickly, on the walk, on the move, or we on the break, prick, check, move on. And I stayed pretty much within the range of 150 to 200 during that portion of the hike. I think I actually got down to like 130 at one point. I was very proud of myself to be in such good control during a manual mode like that. I very much didn't want to only rely on my CGM because in circumstances like that, when your CGM has expired, just knowing that I was able to go manual mode. Granted, it was during, again, the heat of the day, so I was very warm in a more exposed area. That might not be good to do, so you might want to make sure that my sensor does not expire in a situation like that. But it was also comforting to know that I managed the situation pretty well. We got to the camp a little early, Denali Basecamp, and we were actually thinking of flying out just a day early. The planes were coming, we got there early, everything was packed up, we didn't want to set up in a whole new camp again. Unfortunately, as soon as we got there, clouds came in, little storm came in, and planes were canceled for the day. Honestly, that was okay with me. We set up camp, we stayed one more night. The next day, day 10 of the expedition, I thought we were gonna stay a whole nother day. I woke up, it was snowing, light snow. It was beautiful, it was very calm. I went into the kitchen mid-10 and I was reading for hours, and I was just very much comfortable with the situation. I was also very hungry. At that point, the ferro was almost out. I was having little carbs throughout the day because I knew I wasn't going to be able to physically exert myself anymore, that there was no more hiking to do. So I was okay with having like quesadillas, but I wasn't having the amount of nutrients, amount of carbs, the amount of food that I really should have been having. At one point while I was reading, I checked my glucose, and this was the lowest it dropped. It dropped into the low 50s. Very scary moment. Because if it got any lower, we could get a very dangerous situation. Due to the lack of food, lack of nutrients that I was having, my body became even more sensitive to insulin. And we'll get to that in this next topic, but let's quickly talk about how we got off the mountain. I was reading my book. It was a scientific book on endurance. It was great, loving it. I was totally satisfied with just falling asleep and leaving the next day. Our instructor, David, ran into the kitchen tent, goes, pack up, let's go, storm's clearing. No idea the storm was clearing. He got a weather forecast, said the storm's about to clear, they're gonna land the plane in about an hour. So we rushed, absolutely rushed to break down camp, get everything ready in bags, a little disorganized, and we got down to the landing strip where the plane was supposed to land, and then we waited 3 hours. It was a situation of hurry up and wait once more. 3 hours later, the plane landed, and we headed back to Talkeetna. Being from an environment that was so white, and then all of a sudden just green again, I was on Denali in the Kahiltna Glacier for an entire week. It was almost as shocking to go back into civilization as it was to leave civilization. And as we were landing back in Talkeetna with Talkeetna Air Taxi, right on the runway to the left, there was a giant moose. It was great, just put a smile on my face. I think the ending of that trip really hammered down how much I loved being there. So after we landed in Talkeetna, I spent 2 more nights in Alaska. I kept with the camping theme and camped at a local campground. Then I took a bus back to Anchorage and then flew. I had a couple indirect flights. I went from Anchorage to Fairbanks to Seattle, back to Boston on a red eye. So all in all, I was in such a sleep deficit. Post-expedition, when I returned back to Boston, I got sick right away, probably caught something on a plane, and just my body being so down in nutrients and just so sleep deprived. I got sick for a couple days, thought I was better, went on a camping trip a week later to Maine, did a lot of hiking, but while I was hiking, I was still realizing that I pushed it too quickly. And after the camping trip, the week after the expedition, I had another relapse of being sick. Fascinating to know that when I was sick, I don't get sick a lot, but when I get sick, I get hit hard, and your blood sugars, my blood glucose was a little elevated. So from the pre-work trip to Nevada to the Alaska trip that lasted 14 days in total, to getting sick then going on another quick camping trip and getting sick again, my post-expedition A1C was 6.2. Pretty fascinating to see within the span of 4 months, my A1C raised from 5.6 to 6.2. Now, again, not too troubling for type 1 diabetic. That is completely fine. But it's just fascinating to see a little note in my head of how quickly it can change with your different lifestyles that you are going through during certain portions of the year. Okay, let's talk about insulin ratios. Before the expedition, during my training period, like I said, so I use Humalog for fast acting and Lantus for long acting. I use the pen therapy, multiple daily injections, better known as MDI. During the training portion, my ratio for fast acting, so that would be the Humalog, was 1 unit of insulin per 12 carbs. And my long acting was 16 units per night. During the expedition, my fast acting was 1 unit of insulin per 6 carbs, cut right in half, even though my blood sugar was high throughout the day at some points between 180 and 300, bouncing between there. I found that as soon as I gave insulin, my body was still very sensitive. So it would go low, and to prevent it from going low, I'd eat more sugar. So I never let it get too low. I wouldn't let it get below 100. I think the one case where it did get low was the one that I talked about, where it got down to the low 50s. That was the one incident that I think I just being more conscious of. Understand that even though I'm not moving still, I still got to be aware of the amount of insulin within me. My body's very insulin sensitive. My long-acting Lantus while on the mountain got down to 4 units of insulin per night. 4 units, so 16 to 4. Now, the fascinating part of this is post-expedition. So yes, my training program is different. My diet is different. Obviously, my environment is different. But now, this is 6 months after that expedition, and really leading up to this, the amount of insulin I've needed is immensely more. So my fast acting currently, my ratio for my Humalog is 1 unit per 5 carbs. So it went from 1 to 12 to 1 to 5. And my long acting at night, my Lantus at the moment is 25 units. So that went from 16 to 25. Again, this is all information that is just there. I am one person, so we don't really know what to do with this information. But for somebody that likes looking at this data, I found this fascinating. And I am at the turning point in my training process for climbing Denali, where I'm really going to turn up the exertion. So I am excited to see what my ratios do if they start to go back to how they were during the pre-expedition, or if a month-long situation where my blood sugars aren't as controlled as they normally are affected my body in a way that now I just need more insulin. So we'll see. The possibilities are endless. And again, I'm just presenting this data. I'm not really saying anything. I'm not analyzing it too well. I'm just, here it is. Really cool information. So during my training, we'll call the height of the training from March 10th to May 10th. My average glucose was 105. I was 95% in range, 3% high, 1% low, 1% very low. So this is my trip, my work trip to Nevada. Not much has changed. My average glucose was 110. My time in range, 94%. Is 4% high, 1% very high, 1% low, and 1% very low. You could tell that when I am off my routine, I'm more likely to go high. That's a lot of reasons is for safety. I'd rather not go low if I'm not in an environment that I am comfortable in. So my work trip data was from May 10th to May 20th. Moving on to my expedition data from May 21st to May 30th, so in total 9-10 days. Huge change. My average glucose, again, training was 105. My average glucose was 145. My time in range was 70%. I was 28% high and 2% very high. Kind of just like I was saying before, I was okay with going high for the 28%. When I was very high, that 2%, that was something that I don't want to do too often. But this whole trip is a learning lesson. So the 2% very high shows me that when I was very high, it wasn't for a long period of time. So I did a good job managing getting back down into a range that I'm comfortable with. 0% low, and then less than 1% very low, which was that one situation that I had the morning that we were leaving. So you could tell if I continued this trend for 90 days that my GMI, so my A1C, would be predicted to be 6.8. So that would be a jump from 5.6 post-expedition and pre-expedition to 6.8. Pretty significant how just a shift like that, really, you see the effect almost instantly and right away. And you could see that when I went back to get my A1C after the expedition, and it raised from 5.6 to 6.2. So not exactly 6.8, but you could see the significant change in just really one full month of a routine that wasn't the same to what I'm used to. My patterns, I found that my patterns happen to go high during the hike, which I'm okay with. I'd rather go high during a hike than go low during a hike. During the moving portion of this trip was what I found when I was most likely to go high. Looking at this data, this is just information. I'm not really making a huge analysis on it. I think I am preparing my body for the Denali climb hopefully this upcoming May. I have a lot of information of how my body works now on Glacier, how my body works in an environment that is not used to routine, and how my daily routines can help prepare my body for something that is very high intensity, physically exerting. The next steps. As soon as I got back to Logan Airport in Boston, I knew that I needed to get back to Alaska. And I thought, what a better way to go back to Alaska than to make a film about climbing Denali. There's yet to be a type 1 diabetic film and a cinematic experience of something of that scale. I'm not saying that I will summit Denali. I'm not even saying that I'm as prepared as I should be. I got a whole training process to prepare. But I really think it is an opportunity to showcase what can be done. And again, I am still trying to learn best ways to manage. So this whole T1 Determined concept is a way to learn with you. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode of covering what it was like living 1 week on the Kahiltna. We walked over a lot of information of what the actual trip was and what we did on the trip, and then things that I learned about my body, and then my insulin and tools and everything that I hope you can find some useful information. Again, I'm just presenting the information. Hopefully you can find a little piece of information from here, tips and tricks and tools and everything that you can take for your sport, whether that is running, whether that is football, really anything. I think they can all correlate, and in the future we're going to start looking at how these different sports can correlate with one another and how individualized this disease is, but at the same time how small tips, tricks can really help each individual manage. They can alter it for their own personal body. I am so excited to return to Denali. This is something that I've been dreaming about since I was a little kid. I am more excited to do it with Alaska Mountaineering School. Alaska Mountaineering School and my instructors, Greg and David, on this expedition, this Denali Prep Course, invaluable. They are the best of the best, phenomenal, wonderful people and experts. I am proud to be going with them. I am thrilled to be starting the hard work of getting my body ready. And I think the information that I learned from this prep course and actually being there and seeing it and living on the lower part of the mountain and seeing what the upper part of the mountain can be like will help me prepare to go back and do this mountain correctly, be patient, and just hopefully have the opportunity to at least get as far as I can as a type 1 diabetic. I am so excited to return to Alaska. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I encourage you, whether you want to climb Denali or not, at least visit the towns, visit the cities, and see the beauty of the nature up there, and the wonderful people that are up there as well. Thank you for joining me for this special edition of the T1 Determined podcast. As you can see, or if you're listening, we are now doing podcast in a video mode. In the future, when I have guests on the episode, I'm hoping to capture that in video as well. Thank you for listening to the solo episode with myself that we also captured on video. Again, I cannot thank the team at T1 Determined enough. In Low Blood Sugar at High Altitude, the documentary film. I am so grateful for the amount of hard work that everybody is putting in, and I can't thank them enough, especially as Thanksgiving is coming up. I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday, Thanksgiving holiday. And again, November is National Diabetes Month, National Diabetes Awareness Month. So just type 1 diabetics out there, keep pushing, keep dreaming, keep managing. If there's a day where you think you're not managing well, that's okay. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. We're in this for the long haul. So just give yourself some credit for the amount of hard work that you actually do throughout the day, every single day. With all that being said, be on the lookout for more blog posts, more podcast episodes. We will be releasing more with guests and solo episodes. I'll try to do a combination of both, and I'm excited for the lineup that we have. And as this documentary, Low Blood Sugar at High Altitude, gets underway, be on the lookout for updates from that. So thank you for joining. I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and happy National Diabetes Awareness Month. I am Joseph Anthony Marcello, and this is T1 Determined.